Hey, and welcome to Barrel Aged Faith. I'm Kyle King. Got a special guest today, Jonathan Seaborn. How you doing, man?
I'm very well, brother. How about you?
Doing great. So happy that you could finally come on the show and we could make this thing happen. We've been
Indeed,
trying
we
to
have
for a
been.
while.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've been playing an epic game of tag.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
So excited to have you on the show. Jonathan was a Reformed pastor who became Orthodox. I heard about you all the way from the Midwest. You live on the West Coast, and I heard about your story because I was a Protestant pastor who became Catholic, and this person was like, "Man, I just heard of somebody who was like a Reformed pastor who became Orthodox. Like, why would he do that?" And so I began giving him an explanation on why you might have without
Hmm.
even knowing who the heck you were.
Right.
And and so now it's fun to have you on the show where you actually can explain your journey on how like you were a pastor and then joined Orthodoxy. So we're excited to hear your story today. And let's just go ahead and we'll dive right in. First though, one of the biggest things you gotta know about Orthodoxy is like fasting is such a big piece. And it's Christmas time. Well, we're almost at Christmas. It's the nativity fast. And how's the nativity fast going for you, Jonathan?
Yeah, the nativity fast is going well. If we were to rank the fast, which we do not do by effort of ascetical difficulty, the nativity fast is definitely not the hardest hitter. There are fish days, etc., oil and wine days. But it's good. The life of the church kind of supports the fast. We'll have extra services, extra divine liturgies, vespers, and kind of do a shared meal together. It's nice to be on a journey with a community of people together who, are all striving toward God. And yeah, so it's going well. It's going well.
That's awesome. I started doing the Eastern fasts a couple years ago, and I was like, I need support, like jumping into this kind of intense, fasting lifestyle. And so it was fun sending you messages here and there, being like, okay, I've got somebody who's in the trenches doing this. And of course, community is like so important when you're
So
doing the
important.
traditional
Yeah.
fasting of the church. So it's nice that you have a beautiful
Yeah.
community to journey with on that.
It's really cool to be on the same page with other people. I even think of an example of in the CrossFit community. I don't do that now, but a number of years ago, I was pretty involved, and the paleo diet is really huge in that community. And, like everyone at the box that I went to, they would have classes on how to eat paleo. Everyone would be encouraging each other, sharing recipes, and it just really felt like community, like connection, and it gave you a little extra emphasis because you knew why you were doing it. You weren't just doing it for
Hmm.
like win points. And I found the same thing when I came to Orthodoxy. It was like, wow, I'd hear from brothers and sisters across the world or other parts of America going through the exact same fast that I was going to, which, as a side note, is not anything we're doing to earn God's love or favor or salvation, right? It's like putting the rider back on top of the horse, right?
Mm,
It's setting aside the good for the great, to have like a focused season of ascetical effort that's fueled by the grace of God. So I always like
yeah.
to put that out there. I know in my reform days, if I heard ascetic labor, I'd be like, oh, that's works based. And so, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think of it as, you know, being mastered by nothing except the Lord Jesus.
Mm.
Like he's not just the Lord of our souls, but the Lord of our bodies. And so, we desire all sorts of things. And so the fasting side helps us like kind of turn down the volume on the desires of our body so that we can hear his still small voice in the soul. That's one
Yeah.
way I think of it.
Yeah, indeed. It brings clarity into where are the idols still in our heart, right? When all of a sudden we turn that volume down and the passions speak. Passions, by the way, mean like natural facilities that have been moved toward evil, right? Virtues are like the passions that have been reformed, moved back toward God, right? So anger, lust, etc.
Mhm.
Like when we turn the volume down, all of a sudden we notice there's some amplification coming from the inside, and we could see it a little better, right? It's like whack-a-mole. Oh, okay. Oh, there's that. I'm actually a bit more prideful than I thought. Okay, which doesn't lead to despair, leads to, Lord Jesus, heal me, right?
Mm.
Bring life. bring grace. So.
Yeah, and that's a good segue. They were like, fasting is about healing, and orthodoxy is about healing. So let's talk about orthodoxy as we jump in, just real quick before we get into the beginnings of your spiritual journey. I've talked to people, and they, of course, have heard like of Catholics, they've heard of Methodists, Lutherans, Presbyterians, the list could go on, Charismatics, Pentecostals. But I've brought up orthodoxy to people before, and they've never even heard of it. And the closest might be like Orthodox Judaism. And so I think it's always good to throw that out there. Like what is orthodoxy before we jump into your journey on how you arrived there? So like, if you could like briefly summarize, what would you say Christian orthodoxy is?
Yeah, I'll kind of take it from a 50,000 foot view. I had that same experience, even being in, seminary, going through church history. And I had a professor who, although very reformed, was, I would say, charitable toward the Orthodox. And, but even then I felt like I had a veil over my mind of just like, okay, so it's like Catholic, but more mystical. Just my brain was so seeped in Western Protestantism, which was great. I had a hard time comprehending it, and so we'd moved to Austin, Texas, and I met this guy named Justin Marler, and he started what's called Death of the World back in the '90s. He had been in the band Sleep, and then became a monk, an Eastern Orthodox monk. And so, we started having conversations. I'm like, oh yeah, I know what Orthodoxy is. Yeah, it's the Eastern side of the church, right? Like the church was the same for the first 1,000 years. And then, you had the Great Schism in 1054. And then, 4 out of the 5 patriarchs, stayed, and the Bishop of Rome left. And those who stayed were, the Eastern Orthodox. And yeah, I know what that is. And in my conversations with him, I soon learned I really had no idea. That what I just said right there was generally correct. But in a nutshell, when we think of, what is the church, right? It's like the church, of course, starts in the Trinity, right? Continues on through the creation of angels, right? They're in the church. We see it through, and then the creation of humans through the Old Testament, the called out ones, right? And into the new. And so we would say that the Eastern Orthodox Church is the body of Christ on earth, that Christ came on earth, lived, taught, and passed the truth on to his disciples, who passed the truth on to their disciples, right? When he came, divinity, humanity met, the resurrection, he trampled on death by death. And now there's this beautiful connection between divinity and humanity. There's a saying, what's unassumed is unhealed. So since Christ assumed all of humanity, right, which we look at all the battles against the early heretics, they're all trying to, one way or another, undo that or bring in confusion. What's assumed is healed. So in Jesus Christ, through the church, through the dispensing of divine energy, we are made whole. We're made fully human again, which was the original goal, of course, of Adam and Eve, and to actually be deified. And so, as a little side note, it is often said, like, the incarnation is not plan B, right? I mean, sometimes we think of that way. It's like, God was like, oh, shoot. Oh, what am I going to do? It's like, okay, we know he's outside of time and space. He's omniscient, omnipotent, right? So it wasn't plan B. It was always the plan that divinity and humanity would unite fully in
Right
Christ.
on.
So, so in a nutshell, it is the faith passed on, that's referred to as word and in letter and word in 2 Thessalonians 2:15. So that's passed down, guarded, and kept. So that's like maybe a little too ethereal. Let me ask you, do you want me to bring it down to the ground a little bit more, or?
Oh, it's good. We'll get into that more so too. But I think your starting place is good in that you were hitting the main point that, like, when we look at the atonement, even the atonement theory, like why Christ came, why the resurrection happened, why the incarnation happened. You go to those early church fathers like Saint Irenaeus and Athanasius, and they're really talking about this stuff. This is the primary atonement model, that of recapitulation of being healed, like God healing human nature, and then also him descending into Hades and trampling death and liberating those from the realm of death. And so those are the two big sort of images we see for the atonement. And then that really affects how we see the Christian life, the sacraments, the life of the church, our mission in the world, um, is about invading darkness, just like Christ invaded darkness, and then helping people be healed. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great starting point. Spiritually speaking, which is the reality, is the spiritual world. Now, historically speaking, you touched on that as well. And there's key features like apostolic succession and the Eucharist being the body and blood of Jesus Christ, and things like that are key features, of course.
Yeah, huge. And I think what you said right there was essential. Humans have this role between the invisible and the created, right? We're this royal priesthood. And so part of the life of the church, like I said, is the dispensing and releasing of divine energy over all creation. So, like every year we'll have, we'll go down to blessing of the waters, right? And the priest will throw the cross into the waters, and it's beautiful. We see that depicted in an icon where the waters actually turn back the other way, from Christ's original having done that. So yeah, it's this beautiful thing of, we're here now to, of course, since the fall, our nous, eyes of the souls, darkened, right? And so now this journey is to receive uncreated light, receive the grace of God, right? To be healed and formed and reach what's called theosis, right? Union with Christ, union with God. And yeah, it's kind of, it's a challenging and also encouraging picture to see. It's like, yeah, and that's our role, as being organically connected with the deified body and blood of Christ, which, as you stated, happens each week as we take the Eucharist, right? Happens as we do our prayer rule, our morning prayer, our fasting and feasting, confession. It's all around healing our souls, receiving divine energy, so that we can be the three stages: purified, illuminated, and deified. So
yeah, beautiful. Well, let's talk more about that as we jump back into Orthodox. But let's hear about the beginning of your spiritual journey. You didn't grow up Orthodox. Did you grow up in a spiritual or religious home, or was it absent?
I did not. Yeah, no. Yeah, no. Grew up in a home that was not Christian, not church going. My dad did have a spiritual experience when we had moved to Alaska when I was 2 months old. So 1980, he's down there for the construction boom. And unfortunately, he is hooked on drugs. And he does too much acid one night in downtown Anchorage and has a vision of Christ. And interestingly enough, that led him to a local church, which for about a year or two, he really went for it. I mean, I remember him taking us to church every now and then. Like, I was super young, so I remember Awanas, like that was the extent of kind of what I remember. But then it was a flash, and they divorced early, and I was just kind of raised in nothing. Just, my mom was pretty progressive, and I got into punk rock and skateboarding pretty early on. So I had a pretty negative view toward religious people, especially Christians. I used to have written on my wall, "Kill Rush Limbaugh," and upside down flag, kind of all that stuff. And I had another spiritual, experience with religion when I was like 15, which was pretty negative. It was with an independent Bible Baptist church group that my uncle was a part of. So needless to say, my kind of approaching Christianity was not, if anything, I was really going against a lot of prejudice and bias and kind of what I thought Christians were. So.
And then did you have, so you didn't really grow up in a Christian environment. Was there a moment or a time in your life where, boom, it hit you, or you were invited into something?
So it was, when I was 15, got talked into going to church camp, and that was like a little bit of a seed. So I went there with a very negative mindset, and oddly enough, had somewhat, I would say, encounters with God while singing "Our God's an Awesome God." Probably just emotional stuff, right? But my brain was like, "Oh, maybe God's real. Something's going on here." Got back from it, went back to living my life. So yeah, it was when I was 19, and I had been pretty depressed for a good while. I had started having panic attacks, I think, at the age of like 9 or 11, and and had a pretty bad drug experience when I was 15 with PCP, and so I was trying to find existence in everything that comes from non-existence. So I was sleeping around a lot. Like I said, I was playing in a punk band and skateboarding a lot. I was pretty violent, and a lot of parties and such, and it just didn't fulfill, So kind of, hear that story from people. And so my mom was going to the bookstore and said, "Hey, you want to come with me?" I'm sure. And I find this book, which I'm really being vulnerable with you, brother, right now. And you have to make a covenant or a promise with me not to mock me endlessly.
Okay.
But I saw this book, and it said Power of Positive Thinking. And I was like, Norman Vincent Peale, he's like this very like kind of not doctrinally sound. Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I don't think positive. I'll grab that. And so in reading that book, though, he had scriptures throughout it, and he spoke of God as being actually involved and present in people's lives. And that like really opened my eyes, and I started praying and reading scripture. And then I had this, like, what I would say almost like Damascus Road experience, where this kind of like experiential encounter with Christ that was not anything I expected. And so from there, I was like, man, I think I'm actually Christian. I should probably find a church. And so that's a whole nother conversation of how I then started that journey. But yeah, that was kind of, so it was outside of a service, outside of a Christian friend inviting me. I thought I really was clinging to like anything to try to bring me life. And unbeknownst to me, God intervened through a cheesy power positive thinking book and kind of rocked the world. Yeah.
So you just like, you stumbled upon this book, you went to like this church camp experience.
Church camp was like back in 15.
Okay. That was before then. And then it pushed you into searching for like a church.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was that experience? You now claim to be like a Christian. I think God's real. I think this whole thing is real, the Lord Jesus. But then where do I go? Many people find themselves in that situation. They consider themselves a follower of Jesus, but they haven't followed him into a visible church.
Indeed. And in America, I sympathize with them. Right. I mean, it's kind of a
wild west.
Yeah. It's like if you had, 50,000 mechanics that all had a different way of working on a vehicle, right? And each claimed to be the way that's going to cause the vehicle to run like it should, right? And like, okay, well, where do I go? Yeah. So yeah, I remember telling my friends, I was still in the band at the time, and I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to be celibate till I get married. They just started busting up laughing. I'm like, bro, you can't even go a week. Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, okay. So first step is I went back to the church that my uncle and cousin went to, the Independent Bible Baptist one, just for one service, and was like, okay, that's not that's not it. And then there was this church called Bethel in Tacoma, Washington, and they were having a revival. So very charismatic. It was came out of the Azusa Street revival, the early 1900s, late 1800s. And so Pentecostal had moved more like just charismatic, left kind of the holiness roots a little bit. And so I went to that, and it was, they had full praise band, worship, having people come forward to get prayed for, and seeing people like fall, not Benny Hinn style, but more just like kind of falling, down, someone catching them. And yeah, I actually, the first time I went there, the guitar player in my band, who was not a Christian, was with me. And we were like, this is nuts, but kind of awesome. So yeah, so I started to go to those service. I started to go to, they were having them 7 days a week at that point. They'd been in
Wow.
revival for like 50 or 60 days, ended up going for like 2 years. And it was a really beautiful time though. I mean, like the presence of God, like seeking God, being around a whole bunch of people that were like staying up till 2 or 3 in the morning, just like calling out, praying for him to heal, for him to restore. It was really powerful. And so that then again reinforced my now growing idea that, wow, there's a God and he actually cares and wants to heal and wants to restore, and he'll get involved supernaturally. Like
Hmm.
he'll give other people words of knowledge, or he'll, meet you where you're at. So that kind of sparked that. And we early on got involved. And anyways, there's other parts, but I'll kind of pass the mic back.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's cool to see that you went in through this phase of like, okay, God is real, and then now I see him working all around me.
Mhm.
Which for me that was a pretty important experience too. I went through, I don't want to say a charismatic phase because I can still consider that the Lord works that way. He still
Yeah,
works
indeed.
through healings and miracles and closeness, and when you study the ancient church, I mean, the ancient church, particularly Saint Irenaeus, talks about these wild things still happening, like people
Mhm.
being brought back to life, and people being given words of knowledge, and because that person needs to hear what God has to say to them. So I think it is really important, whenever we hear stories about people like going on these journeys of leaving one church to another, that we acknowledge we acknowledge that which is good and from the Lord, and that we don't feel like we're necessarily like leaving that behind.
Yeah. Yeah. A priest had said to me when I was on my journey as an inquirer, was at Holy Resurrection in Tacoma. And he said, everywhere that you met God in your journey, he truly met you. He's like, many times people who are on this path think that, oh, well, what was all this? And he's like, no, no, no. Those were like wells of water to bring you into the ocean. And so, yeah, I thought it was good to hear that
Mhm.
early on.
Yeah, that's good. And what's interesting is that so you've gone through like this charismatic like path, but then you go into the reform tradition, which has a
Mhm.
reputation of being not charismatic, generally speaking, and is
Right.
normally like very serious about like diving into like meaty doctrine, and administering the sacraments and things like that. So what was that transition like from going like as a charismatic to becoming interested in the reform tradition?
Yeah, so we were charismatic, I'd say, for about 8 or 9 years. I was pastoring at a church in Tacoma, which was a around a 1,500, 2,000 member church. I was youth pastor and kind of did the college program, and started to work on my first master's of theological studies, and then folded that into master's of divinity. And it was about a 2 to 3 year process, where as I was taking my courses, there was a lot of good reformed professors at the seminary I went to, also a couple dispensationalists, not my cup of tea. But so yeah, it was that journey of, as I was reading the Institutes by John Calvin, and this idea of like, before God even made the earth, he chose you. And apart from anything you've done, you didn't earn it. Like he gave you his righteousness, took all your sin. And so I had just been reading that, and started to kind of bring that into prayer. And um, yeah, I think because toward the end of my charismatic journey, it had definitely become like what started out of a glowing heart that just wanted to get a crumb from a master's table, just so hungry for God's presence, feeling my panic attacks went away, depression went away. It was like, and I wanted just everyone to experience this. And as the years go on, I felt like because it very much is a choose your own adventure, and there's not, like, oh yeah, do your devotions and read this. I kind of drifted in toward, oh, if I'm not praying an hour or two, then I'm not anointed. If I fell here, that means I should blah, 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 because the anointing's not on me. Really got into almost a workspace, very much workspace, actually, toward the end. And so the doctrines of grace, man, were like fresh water of like, wow, and especially like Timothy Keller, it's like, yeah, religion says I obey, therefore I'm accepted, where, Christ, true Christianity is I'm accepted, therefore I obey. So that flip. So yeah, like I said, 2 to 3 year journey. But I'd say, I was still pastoring at the Charismatic Church when I became what I would call a full 5-point Calvinist with full covenantal theology, like all the way in and airtight. It was like, I loved it. Every part of Tulip lined up and had its supporting parts, and I experienced it experientially. Kind of double emphasis word there, but so it wasn't just a dry doctrine to me. You know what I mean? So I saw a lot of people who were raised in that tradition, and it was very dry to them. You're gonna say?
Yeah. So you were considering yourself kind of like charismatic reformed, but your church wasn't officially that. It was just something that was like that was your own journey. Is that what you're saying?
For the first part, yeah. When we were
Okay.
still at the church that my wife and I pastored at, we were still, in the charismatic context, and yeah. And so then we had a accredited Bible college that we did in conjunction with my seminary, and so we had like 12 students, adults, who lived with different pastors, including myself and my wife. And we would meet every day for prayer, for teaching, all that. And a number of the kids started to become like Calvinist, reformed, which upset the super duper charismatic moms who thought their kids were losing their salvation. But so yeah, that was all of that. When we actually jumped into the reform side, it was when we were coming here to Bend, Oregon, 2011, to plant a church. And at first we were checking out Acts 29. We were going that route, getting ready to do a boot camp.
Kind of famous by like Mark Driscoll. It'd be kind of one of the guys who was a part of it. Yeah. Matt Chandler. Yep.
For sure. And then we were looking into EPC, and then we just after a year or so, we put that all on the shelf because we were healing from some pretty deep stuff that occurred at that charismatic church, some very, very painful things. And, my wife said one day, I don't know if I can be a pastor's wife. And I actually, at this moment, don't even know if I could be your wife. So I said, okay, you're my first covenant. Let's, put that on the shelf. So when we did about 2.5 years later, when we were feeling healed up, she was feeling healed up. That's a whole nother story I won't go into right now. It was pretty amazing how that all happened. We joined the Evangelical Presbyterian Church. So it's like in between. So if PCUSA is like the super progressive kind of like, did the resurrection happen? Maybe, who knows? Right. And then PCA is like very, very conservative. EPC would be still on the conservative side, but like the church that we pastored down in Brownsville, on the elder board, there were two females who were ruling elders.
Yeah, I remember studying. Studying that. As kind of like
the church had come over from the PCUSA. They made an exception, whereas other presbyteries in the EPC did not allow that. The presbytery, the Gulf Coast presbytery I was in, did for certain exceptions. But still, it'd be, men were called to be the teaching elders, etc. And at this church I happened to go to pastor, they had this mixture of, a lot of them had come from the Charismatic Church.
Oh, okay.
And found the doctrines of grace very, very like healing and soul affirming, and kept both. So that was one thing in it was like an 8-month process to get called as the pastor, including a train ride my son and I took down there to preach and such. And that was one of the parts. We're both believe in the gifts of the Spirit, and also Reformed covenantal, like liturgy based service. Wow. Like Protestant liturgy based. So call and
Yeah,
response,
yeah,
call to repentance. Like,
right. Yeah, so you're kind of like in
no.
this sweet spot where you're trying to bring like the best of like the charismatic and the best of like the reformed and the doctrines of grace into one place, and it's going well.
Mhm.
What happened to say, is there something that you had an experience or like a theological obstacle that you were working through? What caused you to then begin thinking of like orthodoxy, or was there like, did you begin studying the church fathers and discovering the church, the visible church that was there in the ancient church?
Yeah, great question. I have a huge Logos Bible software guy, so I have pretty big
Mhm.
library all about that. And as I was doing, I did oh my goodness, I want to say existential, exegetical preaching, expository preaching, excuse me, exegetical study, expository preaching. Sorry about that. And I'd read through like the sermons of St. John Chrysostom, and
Mhm.
I would like reference him with the early church fathers, but it was divorced from the life of the church. So that didn't really, I thought it was wonderful, but that didn't really turn the light on. It was I was in Austin, Texas, and we had left the church in Brownsville to join a church plant in Austin that was a brewery on one side, and then the church kind of as a part of that. And it's the brewery's still going
Nice,
there. It's a
yeah,
great brewery,
yeah.
yeah. And
The
we
brewery
had
church
met.
in Austin, Texas, okay.
Yeah. I'd met the pastor, church planner, person starting the brewery at Presbytery. I think it was like either Mississippi or Alexandria. Excuse me, Vicksburg, Mississippi, or Alexandria, Louisiana, or something. Anyways, I'd never been to the South, so that was cool for me. But so we're in Austin, and I meet this guy who, not the person I was just referencing, but I'd seen this article that someone created, like made punk rock versions of hymns and sold the CDs for, and all the proceeds would go to Syrian refugees, type thing. I was like, oh, that's great. We're, working, we're doing acts of justice. That's get my well, that's great, So I met the guy. His name was Justin Marler, and we just became really good friends. Our families became really close, and he was one of the founding members of the metal band Sleep, and then left and became an Eastern Orthodox monk. And so he started to, tell me about it. And I was like, oh, yeah. And I know about Orthodoxy, and so glad I didn't have any pride or anything. And, and man, I tell you what, the combination of just, he's an interesting cat. I mean, he's humble. He's also super duper intelligent. And then he also every now and then, like he says, hey, I think I might be on the autistic spectrum every now and then, because he'll just also say things pretty bluntly, So
Mhm.
it was a combination of all those things that, in our conversations, it's like, whoa, maybe what I think I know about the Eastern Orthodox Church is not it's not the case,
Mhm.
And so, we would debate and that sort of thing. And I'd bust out my seminary guns that ended up being squirt guns. Um, complete. But he was so humble and gracious about it. And so like, yeah, it was interesting. It was like, I feel like I'm meeting someone who's been healed. Like that's
Mm,
different, And I
that's
think that was
powerful.
one of the
Yeah.
bigger things at the end was, this, I don't mean this in any negative way, because I could still meet tons of people in the ancient faith who are still, it's not about how nice you are, or Mormons would be like, have the corner on it. Right.
Right
Right.
on, yeah.
But I just remember some of the professors I really looked up to, scholars that are like editors on, famous study Bibles and expository sets and etc. And, some of them were really amazing. And some of them were like, just, whoa, it's okay, this is just, I just got tired of, it just seemed like a show, kind of cutting to a segment of, for my own personal experience, the kind of Protestant experience just got like tedious to me. It's like, okay, I want to find where the Spirit and good theology like come together. But it's like, man, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to happen. So, so like I said, he planted all those seeds. I had gotten a scholarship to go to Gordon Conwell to do some postgraduate work. And I thought that's going to be the answer. That's where I'm going to do, that's where I'm going to do some deep work around bringing the power and presence, gifts of the Holy Spirit, and sound doctrine and liturgy together. And that was the 6-week trip that kind of led us. We ended up going to a monastery. And anyways, I'll just preface the edge of that kind of throw it back to you.
So you got to visit a monastery when you were checking out Gordon Conwell on the East Coast? Was that what you were?
No.
Okay. You're talking about Gordon Conwell, so I was.
Yeah, in Austin, and we're gonna go. I got accepted to Gordon Conwell, and they had this scholarship program, and I got accepted into that, and so we decided as a family before moving to the East Coast.
Okay,
to go through and up the West Coast. Yeah, and our friend Justin had said, "Hey, well, if you're going through California, you should go to St. Herman of Alaska Monastery in Platina, California." Had been started by Father Seraphim Rose in the 60s.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've heard of that monastery because he was there, so it's a pretty famous one.
Yeah, and so we ended up swinging by. Now, the first time we went to a liturgy was during this trip, but it was before we went to St. Herman of Alaska Monastery, and yeah, it was like we were in Arizona, and I really didn't know anything from. I mean, we'd been listening to some catechism podcasts. Justin had loaded me up with a bunch of books. I've been reading those, starting to practice the Jesus prayer. And my wife and I'd be listening to the podcast and sometimes be like, "Oh, that's so beautiful." And then the next moment be like, "Oh gosh, that's so works-based." And what? Like, is this like cosplay for like people who want to be like Russian peasants? Like, what's going on? And so just still had no idea. And so we went to a Greek Orthodox church, and it was, it was very much a culturally Greek. They're very, very nice. It had pews and organ, just so everyone who's not aware, that's not the norm in Orthodoxy.
Right.
So my wife and I were kind of, my wife left. She'd been raised nominally Catholic. And she was like, no, I didn't like that. And I was like, yeah, I didn't like that either. I was like, okay, well, we kind of cross that Eastern Orthodoxy thing off the list. I'll keep reading this theology, but I still was thinking like a full-blown, Protestant, which was, great at the time. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to continue to expand my context of the spiritual life within the Christian church. So yeah, it wasn't until we went to the monastery that.
Was this all like during the same week?
No, it was about because it was about a 6-week trip. So this is probably 3 weeks later. We had already scheduled 2 or 3 weeks later. We had already scheduled to stay at the monastery. So after that experience in Arizona, we were like, meh. We are like, oh, well, we already have this scheduled, so we'll go. And so we're driving out in the middle of nowhere in California, up this mountain, and we get to the monastery, and that's where, basically that evening we roll in and they're having a divine liturgy, Vespers, which is evening service. And I remember going in there and seeing the icons and the monks chanting this like beautiful Trinitarian theology, full of scripture, full of just. And I remember, as I was standing there, I almost like went full charismatic on it. I mean, I felt God's presence so overwhelmingly that I almost fell. I mean, it was like, okay, so
which is
wow,
an interesting experience.
What's going on?
Yeah,
yeah, especially surrounded by monks in this, and the other, we didn't know what to do at all. And there were other, pilgrims there. They're all from Russia. So we didn't share a common language, but, the women showed my wife and only one daughter at the time, daughter how to, like, what to do. And I was kind of watching the other people, kind of learning the sign of the cross, and we go up and kiss the priest's hand. And I was like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
Kiss a hand. And then I saw them do, communion, which I had seen at the Arizona one too. They had a little golden spoon, putting it in the chalice, getting the blood in the bread, well, the wine and bread at the time is when I just thought of it. And it's just like, this is weird, but yeah. So it was there that it went like that. And Abbot Damascene, the abbot of the monastery, and Father Paisius, were just super patient and kind, and sat with us for hours and answered our questions, and loaded us up with a whole bunch of books as well, and icons. And Father or Abbot Damascene kind of like, okay, where are you going next? And recommended some parishes, hooked us up with some people, which I can get into later. But
I was just going to say, amazing. like I grew up in a tradition that was very seeker sensitive, like right when Rick Warren's Saddleback Church was exploding and Willow Creek. And so like all these Baptist churches and non-denominational churches really trying to like copy their style.
Yeah.
And it's just so different than the experience that you had of like seeker sensitive. The seeker sensitive movement has made us all spoiled to think that whenever we visit a church, we should feel like super comfortable. We should have like a coffee in one hand. We should be greeted. Our kids should go off and go play in this play place.
Yeah.
And everything should be so well explained that we don't even really have to do any kind of like mental work at all.
Yeah. No
and
adjustments.
then we just, and so it's just like you have that kind of culture now in America. That's how it was in the beginning in the early 90s. And now that's become dominant in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
And so to like describe like what your experience was like in checking out like your first divine liturgy, and then people even like being in a different language is such a contrast.
And very long. Yeah. I mean, like
super
long. And they're not trying to be impressive. And the priests are not trying to be witty and being like making jokes at all. It's serious. It's not dour and like stuffy. It's actually full of life, but in just such a different way. It's not trying to trump up emotions. Emotions aren't bad, but that's not the goal. It's dispensing divine energy. It's inviting you into the liturgy that was even before the liturgy of the angels. Like, man is a liturgical being, right? And the faith is what heals, right? And so if our faith is off, our dogma is off, right? That means our course of healing is going to be off, right? If what we believe doesn't correspond, it's where orthodoxy, one part of that is right belief. And that's because if it doesn't correspond with reality, healing's not occurring, right? I mean, God's still gracious. God is so gracious. He heals everywhere, man. But as far as a life and a path, right? And so I remember my first season of Lent where it's like, oh, wait, the services are longer, even longer now. And they use a tone. I was at one where they use Byzantine tone that then gets even more kind of like drawn out and slower, and the colors are different. And it was like, whoa, there's prostrations. You're doing tons of prostrations, which is basically where you get, basically Muslims got that from seeing Eastern Orthodox believers back in the,
absolutely
Middle East. Yeah. So it looks like that basically. And you're doing tons of them. And it's kind of like it reminded me of like, whoa, this is like CrossFit in that it's not appealing to the easiest way. You can go to a big gym and get like, Planet Fitness where it's purple and they're giving out Tootsie Rolls and everything's comfortable. Or you can go to CrossFit and just about almost throw up. But you have other people that are doing that too. And they're like, it's like, holy cow, this is it. So, it's one of the reasons they say, if you look at the the gender percentages in churches. They say in the Protestant church, it's like the percentage of members. I forget it now, but it's like a higher number is female.
Right.
Great. Praise God. That's awesome. But in Orthodox, you actually see it being a little higher male or around the same, and it's because there is a path and things to do with your body. It's not just it's a logical, a being change. Like here's the feasting, the fasting, the prayers, confession, Eucharist. This is the path, and this is the path that makes you actually become human again. Deified, united with God, and what all of that means.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man. I've studied that where in Eastern Orthodoxy that there being a higher percentage of men, which really stands out because men just have a hard time attending church. I mean, when you look at the stats in the United States, it's hard to get men to show up to church. You oftentimes just see spouses there with their kids. And so to see there being progress in this area, you want to ask the big reason, okay, what's the reason? What is causing this attraction for men to come in and worship and fast and prostrate? And I think part of it is that, of course, it's connecting with the Lord, but it's how we're connecting with the Lord. It's not trying to pull us in through just sitting there and taking in information. Sitting in pews and listening to an hour-long sermon and just taking in content, kind of like you're at school,
right?
Which we know boys have a hard time sitting at the desk, sitting and just taking in information. Boys have a harder time, is what I should say. Typically, it seems to be the case. But then we're also not in Orthodoxy and in liturgy. There also isn't this kind of romanticism. When I say romanticism, I mean it in kind of a sappy way that we see in evangelicalism, where I'm trying to lift up my hand to show how much I'm in love with Jesus.
Right.
And I'm not saying it's an entirely bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying though is to pull men in, it can't feel overly sappy, nor can it just be sitting there taking in content. I think it's this asceticism, this training, this using the body and having a rhythm and a purpose for why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And something that's, no, I like that distinction, and something that's different than, oh yeah, we're having man church, or we're having this retreat and we're just, we're cooking steaks and we're,
throwing axes. Yeah.
Where it's just this, it's way too uberly American masculine, in a different way, where, I think with Orthodoxy, it's why do outlaw motorcycle clubs appeal to men so much? I mean, to a huge portion of men. I mean, you can find dentists, lawyers, etc. But I mean, a lot of them will still, ride with 1% motorcycle clubs, not like Wild Hogs, if you ever saw that. I mean, true 1%.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, is that you don't just go up to, a Bandito or Hell's Angel or Pagan or whatever club's the dominant club in your area and say, hey, I want to be a member, or you don't meet them on your motorcycle at the gas station and they say, oh, hey, come, we have a great clubhouse. We got midweek, family barbecues. We got, this and this, because it's it's almost like when a guy's overly pursued by a girl in high school, right? What's the guy's general response? It's kind of naturally I don't know. I'm a little cautious here. Right. And so when you kind of go into just a general church and you feel like you're just being, oh yeah, join our small group, do this, do that. Whereas in the motorcycle club, I remember, I did not join a 1% club. I joined one that ministered to 1% clubs and followed those protocols. And, a lot of them were ex 1%ers. I couldn't just go up and say, hey, I want to be this. Or I couldn't even go up and say, hey, I want to be a prospect. I could say that and say, yeah, you need to be a hang around first. So I was watching motorcycles in the, the parking lot, and then you're just basically doing kind of whatever. And then you get a bottom rocker in your prospect. And then after you maybe have that for a year or two, sometimes longer, depending on the club. And then you finally get your full patch, and all your brothers around you, you get patched in, you're part of a family. And I remember we were at an event with the dominant club in Washington State. And I was talking to like a VP of one of the local chapters, and he happened to be a tattoo artist, and the guy next to him was an electrician. And I just made the offhanded comment of, oh, so I bet you get some ink then, huh? Like, meaning from his brother who's the tattoo artist. He's like, oh, that's my brother. He's like, he'd give me free tattoos any time. I did his whole tattoo shop, all the electrical work for free, because that's my brother. And I just remember being like, wow, and I think that's a bit what the Orthodox experience is, and especially in America. When I went to be an inquirer, like, okay, I can make that choice, but so I'm learning about the faith. We get to Yakima, Holy Cross, Father Joseph, and Abbot-Damascene became my spiritual father, and he said, oh yeah, just ask about becoming a catechumen. And so I go up to him, and it's like the first week we're in Yakima. We've been going to services maybe 3 months at this point. We'd lived over in Tacoma. And I said, oh, Father, I'd like to become a catechumen. Heidi and the family would like to be catechumens. He goes, oh, Jonathan, puts his hand on my shoulder. The church is slow. Take your time, come to the services, do the fast, come to the life, come to the catechism class. We'll see. So we were inquirers for about a year before he finally he's like, okay, Holy Saturday, I believe it was 2017. That's going to be you and your family's baptism date. And you're, and you have a sponsor, a godfather. And he had reached out to Abbot-Damascene and asked him if he'd be mine. And then with other families of the church, the kids and the wife got connected. And it's very much that, So then we were, catechumens for, I think, 5 months after the year of being inquirers. We'd gone through the whole catechism class. And that really appealed to me, man. It was like, it wasn't just like I'm earning it. Oh, look at me, what I'm doing. It was like, this is of ultimate importance.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just, oh, hey, come on up, raise your hand, you're in. Like, no, this is such a beautiful and holy and life-affirming way that, Father Joseph wanted to make sure, like, let's take you all the way through the Nicene Creed and breaking down each part of it, doing a whole, I forget how many months that was. It was so long. And have you be able to say that the Eastern Orthodox Church is the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church. Boom. And then we'll let you be a catechumen. And I thank God for that. I thank God for that whole experience. But long answer to say, there is something about us. We're like trucks, right? We need a load put in the back during the winter so we don't slide around everywhere. And I think that's, that's how we're made. When things are too easy, that's when our souls get damaged. It's not during, of course we get damaged during times of struggle, but there's tons of examples about that, like in nature and our own body. They say if you wear shoes that are too comfortable, it'll ruin your feet. It's like it feels nice to your feet at first, and you think like, oh, these must be like therapeutic, really good shoes. And then they say like, no, those are the worst shoes you could ever wear because your feet become lazy, and then they begin to break down. Or you think of trees, a tree that never experiences wind, and then the first big windstorm comes, it's going to take on some major damage because it hasn't been used to strengthening its root system. It hasn't been used to, mild versions of wind. And so you can think about all these types of things. It's like, no, like suffering, that's like training us to become ready to thrive, Yeah, our immune systems. We don't encounter certain viruses for a period of time, or they say if a kid doesn't have one for a long time growing up, their odds of getting leukemia go up, right? Because their body's like has a little response in the immune response, right? Or it's not like we're seeing in this season right now, right? We've kept everyone safe, and now the flu and the RSV has been pumping iron on the side, and our kids and all of us are getting these flu viruses that our bodies are like, oh, hey, what's going on there? I haven't seen you for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny when you really start studying this all in nature and reality, that like the things that we're talking about within the faith are no different.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's like even with fasting, like if we just look at the biological side, it's not even the spiritual, but doctors will say that when you fast, like we talk about this with like intermittent fasting, that your body begins kicking in anti-aging like techniques, or like not techniques, anti-aging systems like
Mm-hmm.
kick in your body, where instead of aging, like you're actually doing the opposite when you intermittent fast.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so you apply that to the
Yeah.
spiritual realm, and that's what we're saying is there's no division between the spiritual and the physical, and so typically the things that are healthy in the physical world, like they actually correspond quite well in the spiritual world when you study theology, I think, in a healthy way.
That is such a good point. Back to that workout analogy, right? I mean, we suffer when we don't have strenuous exercise, when we don't lift weights and run and go after it. Like our bodies atrophy, get weak. Our bodies don't release the insulin life growth factor and testosterone growth hormone at the same levels it would. Even if our IQ goes up when we're consistently exercising, protects us from disease. And I think if we were to make that parallel a lot, and this isn't a wholesale critique, I know so many exceptions to this, but if you just took as a whole, especially maybe the seeker sensitive movement,
Mhm.
there's not a load on the truck. It's like, here, let us take all the weights off your hands. Let us make it so easy. And you can sit on the couch and that'll count as a workout. Like,
Right.
don't worry about it. Here's a Tootsie Roll. And then we were like, why are we spiritually atrophying and weak and fat on the couch spiritually? And just, you know, nowadays it's, Christians just fall like a
Yeah, yeah.
line of dominoes. It's like, oh no, I don't have convictions. It's like,
Right.
no wonder. And that was one thing too that kind of, I looked at the trajectory, kind of the arc of some of the faiths, right? And so you have, obviously the first 1,000 years, the church is one. Obviously, there's some heretical movements, right? And then there's the split, and you have, on the West, the Catholic Church, and then, or Roman Catholic Church, I'll specify, and Eastern Orthodox Church. And if we're going to look at those as ships, I'll just stick on my side of the street. I'll let you talk on your end.
Yeah.
But I'm
Be a fun
obviously the
conversation.
Catholic Church is still here and still, last I heard, you guys still have some saints being produced and such. But on our side, it's like an ark that it's left the shore and it's been through so many, the Turks, right? It's been through so many persecutions,
Mhm.
right? The Bolshevik Revolution, on and on and on and on. And yet, even in areas and periods of time where there's deep suffering and persecution, it's continued to pass on the apostolic deposit, the tradition that was passed on to them, right? The oral and written, it was never
Mhm.
just one. The sources of inspiration, right? We definitely believe the Bible. We also, follow tradition, which is what was passed on. And sometimes I'll make a reference. I don't have everything written out. So if I say 2 Thessalonians 2:15 and it's 2:10, I just ask for everyone's forgiveness. Okay. But that is this beautiful arc that suffered. And man, it's not cute. It's not sexy. I mean, you look at Orthodox history too. I mean, you have the old calendar, you have even what's going on right now with Russia. And so I'm not trying to make it sound like it's Wonderland. No, it still has its human element. There's still tares in wheat, right? There's still going to be those aspects, right, in every system. But when we look at a lot of the ships from, the Protestant side, and there's some are going wonderfully, so this isn't a wholesale critique, but many of them haven't weathered storms, right? They've kind of either threw all of their distinctive beliefs off the ship because they were taken on water, or their ship just completely crumbled when their founder died, or There's, they say 50,000 denominations right now, right? And
Yeah.
so it's just a constant movement, right? And so that was something where I was like, okay, yeah, I want to be a part of something that's not dependent on a personality, not dependent on, just that human motivation.
Yeah, yeah, like you're passing on like the faith to your kids, and
Yeah,
that faith's gonna be rock hard and survive well past their own lives.
yeah.
Um, and that you're not just handing on some kind of, charismatic personality to them. Um, so back to your story.
Hmm.
So you visited the monastery, you had this really a powerful spiritual experience. Just weeks before you said no after the Greek Orthodox liturgy. I'm not sure that Orthodoxy is going to be for us. So you leave the monastery, and we've heard that you do sign up, like you get to be a catechumen. What's that next stage like that before you become a catechumen and that monastery experience? Like, what happens to your family? Like who says they want to become Orthodox first, like you or your wife? What do family think? What does family think? What do people like in your own church? I mean, you've been in ministry. What are these
Hmm.
people thinking when you're saying, "Hey, I think we're thinking about becoming Orthodox"? Like, what was that kind of response? I think I'm interested
Yeah,
to hear all this.
these are great questions. Yeah, so after at the monastery and Abbot Damascene, says, "Hey, where's the rest of your trip?" He said, "Oh, go to Ashland, Oregon." Father Andreas and the church there, it was wonderful. And he was actually, the Father Andreas was out in Sweden. He's from Sweden, and he was back visiting. So we went to Archangel Gabriel in Portland, Oregon. And we went there. And, before we went there, we swung back by Bend. Mind you, we hadn't been living there now for like a couple years, and met with one of our friends here. And, he's like, oh, told him about our journey, and he's so he had come from Grace Church in Seattle, Capitol Hill, Seattle, which is a PCA church. And the
Mm.
pastor there, Pastor John, was like a mentor to me and really just an amazing man of God and super helpful. And so when this guy, Brian, moved to Bend, he said, oh, hey, connected me with him. So now years later, we're back. I'm telling him about our journey. He's like, oh, that's awesome. Actually, I've been kind of thinking about that a little bit. My brother-in-law is a deacon at the Orthodox Church over in Portland, Archangel Gabriel, and he actually became Orthodox at Princeton. And I'm like, intriguing, So he tells
Sure,
us all
yeah.
about that, and we go to a service, and it was amazing, right? But as we get there, there's people lined up outside of the church holding roses. We're like, what's happening? We look into the church, and like these priests and deacons and people in these robes are like waiting for someone. And I'm like, surely this isn't for us. Should we walk in there? I don't even know what's going on. And so the lady sees we're obviously super confused and have no idea what's going on. And she comes over, oh, hey, are you visiting? And oh, a bishop's coming today, and this is for a bishop visit, and this is what we do. And she's explaining everything. So nice.
Oh,
We're talking, and she asked us how we got here. We kind of told them the thumbnail. Like, oh, wait, are you the Seaborns? We're like, what? She's like, oh yeah, it was literally my friend's sister-in-law. That was
oh,
the one
well,
that
hey,
organically found us. Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah, she sat, stood by
awesome.
us because it was standing room only. They don't have seats at this parish. And so amazing. And she's telling us, all what's happening and the different parts. And, afterwards we meet, the bishop, the priest. There's a number of priests there. It was just, yeah, amazing. And this line that was consistent, and I forgot to mention it earlier, was welcome home. And, even before we left, my wife, kind of in her prayer and just kind of getting ready for the next season, kept getting this like, honey, I just feel like we're going to be coming home. And we didn't know that was a common saying in Orthodoxy. I don't know if that's one in Catholicism too, but like we didn't
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that was. And we thought maybe, oh, that means we're going to go back to our charismatic roots. Like, what does that mean? So, anyways, we start hearing this phrase, and there at the church, we met this older gentleman who had been a professor at Fuller
Oh, wow.
Theological Seminary in California, and had lived over in Jerusalem for a number of years. And then him and his wife became Orthodox, and and he goes, "Welcome home doesn't just feel like home," and that continued to occur. So from there, we sadly, my mother had died about 2 months before this. She had completed a suicide, and so it was like joy and pain mixed throughout this. And
Sure.
so we,
Wow.
on this part of the journey, so who decided to come into the church first and all that. When we're leaving the monastery, right? So pause, answering now your second question.
Yeah.
And my daughter and I, Alicia, who's now 17, she was like, I'm terrible with, I think 13 or whatever at the time. And she was just like, "Oh, I love this. I want to be Orthodox." And my son was like, "Dad, we're Presbyterians." "We're Presbyterians, Dad." And I was like,
I mean, it's cool to
like,
see teenagers passionate. Yeah, like
yeah, I was like, "Man, I admire that chutzpah," okay. And my wife was like, "I love it." And I don't know. I don't, she didn't have the most positive experiences with Catholicism because,
sure.
I mean, she wasn't even in the life of the church. So it's not a fair comparison. It's like, I think the mom went like a couple times a year, and she talked to priests and to be able to do the catechism herself. So when my wife did her confirmation and such, it was like her mom was the catechist, which, so she's just like, "Oh, I don't know. I don't know." But it was when we went to the parish that we just mentioned in Archangel Gabriel in Portland, where boom, for her, she was like, "Yes, I want to join the church." My son was still, "Hey, I kind of like this, but I'm Presbyterian, I don't get it." And so we went to, so now picking back up where I was, we stayed at my mom's house. She had passed, and she had a home in Tacoma. And so we lived there for 3 months because I decided at this point, well, I don't think I'm going to go to Gordon Conwell and talk to a couple priests. Like, I have an MDiv. I don't know if I want to get more in this tradition. I feel like at this point, I'm convinced this is the church, and I'm going to put that on pause, but I don't know what I'm going to do now, So we stayed, like I said, we still had some savings. I'd worked at a really cool company in Austin, and we were able to make that work.
Good.
So we stayed there, and we went to Holy Resurrection in Tacoma. Beautiful community, Orthodox church. And yeah, it was wonderful. Go to services, and then we're still like, okay, where do we want to go? Do we stay here? Do we go to Yakima? That was another one that Abbot Damascene had mentioned, and Heidi's mom, that's my wife, was living over there at this point, and so was her brother. Or do we go to Ashland? And so, long story short, we'd gone over to Yakima a couple of times. They have an Orthodox school there, like K through 7th grade or 8th grade or something. And my wife's she was a teacher at a classical school, Coram Deo, down in Brownsville when we were down there. And while we're there, they're like, "Hey, we need another teacher. Like, you have a job. If you want a job, we'll hire you as a teacher." And then the priest's son, who is an eye doctor with I think now 10 kids, the Copeland family, so gracious and loving. They had a large house, and they had it downstairs. They said, "Hey, we have 2 bedrooms and a living room, and you can live with us." So we providentially were like, we see doors opening. So that's where we decided to then move to Yakima and just jump into the life of the church there, which is very, very robust. Father Joseph does the whole, every morning there's a matins. Every evening he does a vespers. He does all the feast days. He does the vigils. His spiritual father was of blessed memory, Elder Ephraim. And so very go after it, every home a monastery. And it was such a beautiful, wonderful healing experience. So that's kind of, all of that. How was family responding? Church family, etc. Yeah, it's interesting. For the most part, it was almost like how do I say this? Like, you know, we had one family member who, one of my wife's siblings, and he, well, a very, very, very well-meaning person who's Protestant, and would, you know, send over articles of like, you know, like the Stephen Anderson and those like complete like way out there people, like the anti-Eastern Orthodox, anti-Catholic, you know, like, and he'd send over articles, you know, like, oh, look out for this, look out for that. Like, are you sure it's works based? You know, we had some people that were just a little like, what? Why do you want dead religion? You know, etc. But overall, it was, you know, we'd also gone through an interesting journey where it was like, yeah, we had pastored in Tacoma, and then things, you know, how that went, and that was kind of the charismatic one, and we still had a lot of the friends there. But my wife and I were always in positions of being pastors, and so I think there was also a little bit of like, you know, they're like, oh well, I don't know, I want to say this, not to say that like, oh, we're like these really smart people and all this, but they, you know, studied a lot, and I don't know if they, you know, felt like if they did have a concern, like they could say it in a way where we wouldn't have an answer or something. I don't know if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
no, it
So,
makes a lot of sense. I mean,
okay.
I ran into very similar things where it was almost kind of like, an in uh, it was almost kind of like they viewed, my journey as something that was just so intellectual that it wasn't worth engaging, and it probably, you know,
Bingo.
God might be in it, but he also may not be
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's too intellectual or something,
Oh,
you know?
Kyle, he's just that really, really intelligent guy, and he's probably just got himself in
Yeah.
these like, yeah,
It's like this roller coaster inside his head all the time, so this is a
yeah,
way
he's
to
got
fix
stuck in an
that, you
ivory
know?
tower, and now he's a Catholic, you know, like, for sure. Yeah, so maybe something like that, and we were just so full into the life of the church too. I mean, we lived right down the road from the actual parish. You know, they had a men's group that would meet. You know, we do the matins at 5 a.m. And then afterwards, Father Joseph would take us through various books and talk, teach. And yeah, it was a glorious time. It was a really glorious time there. Yeah. So
That's
okay,
super
let's
cool.
see.
Yeah.
Was there any aspect of the question? Let's see. Did I hit all the questions?
Yeah, I think you really did, and I want it for our listeners, like, I want them to really make a strong connection to that, like, you know, orthodoxy in the life that you're entering into, that's been something that's been consistent since, like, the ancient church. I mean, when we talk about, like, the fasting and we talk about liturgy of Saint John Chrysostom, which is the liturgy, you know, of divine liturgy. Like, I mean, that's that's awesome to be entering into a liturgy that's that old, you know?
Yeah, that is, as
Um,
you know, the abbreviated version of Saint Basil,
right,
Divine Liturgy, which is the abbreviated version of Saint James, all the way back to the first century. Right, his
right,
liturgy was 6 hours. So,
right. Yeah.
yeah,
They
entering back
just kept making it
into,
shorter and shorter.
yeah,
And it's not short.
no,
'Cause I've been to a divine liturgy and, it was longer, than my current liturgy because they in the Catholic Church, they shortened the liturgy of Saint, Gregory and made some big changes. But, so it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, getting back into, I think, looking at worship not as what you're always just getting from it, you know, but
hmm,
instead of it becoming a part of almost your own experience, like you're getting caught up in this rhythm where time ceases.
yeah,
I don't know if you have you had
literally,
I mean, I've had that experience in liturgy where it's like, man, this could go on forever, and I don't feel like time would pass.
yeah. I mean, and that's literally what happens in that we believe when we go into the divine liturgy, we're entering into the liturgy that has been going even before the creation of the earth. And we're entering in spiritually, just like kind of when we do like nativities coming up, right? We're not just celebrating Christmas as like a remembrance of Christmas. We believe mystically through the Holy Spirit we're going back to the first Christmas. We're experiencing it for the first time, right? Pascha, same thing. It's like
Mhm.
during Holy Saturday. So, you know, Good Friday, and then Holy Saturday, and then you have Pascha, Easter in the West. It's like on Saturday, we are entering into, we don't know what's happening. We're reading through Lamentations. We're reading through huge chunks of the Old Testament. And on that, like that sense of, and I, the word's failing me at the moment. Like I said, I didn't like
Like
write a lot of stuff
lament?
out. Was that?
Like lament? Like the feeling of lament
Oh,
in that
for
moment,
sure,
or
we did lament, but I mean this other, like the eighth day, like
Oh, yeah, yeah. So
this
sure.
other time that we come into when we're celebrating the feasts and the, like I said, Pascha
Mhm.
or Nativity, and I think that's a beautiful thing too, right? It's like we do something as we enter into the church, eh, where we're walking, we're leaving in a way the cares of the world, and we are switching into this mode of now we're entering the unseen. We're entering the divine liturgy where angels are around us, the saints are around us. We are receiving divine energy, which is God Himself, that's healing our nous, right? During the fall, our nous was darkened. So we stopped seeing everything in its relationship to God, right? And now the nous previously was over the rational faculty. Post fall, the rational faculty is number one, and then the nous is darkened, right? So we're receiving divine energy, we're
So when you say
partaking of it.
news too, like in English, a lot of times in the Bible, it might be translated into like mind.
Mind.
Like
Mm-hmm.
in Romans, it's like Paul will talk about the mind being darkened
Renewing
in
your
Romans
mind, and
chapter 1 and 2, and
yeah,
then you get to
chapter 12.
12, yeah, where
Yeah,
he says renew your mind. But the word mind has its limitations. Like it's not really we too quickly think of just the intellect,
right.
uh, or the rational part of our brain, and we don't think about the mind as like the spiritual eye.
The noetic,
Like
yeah, the noetic
yeah, yeah. Now when you're saying
capacity.
nuisance, like all that's kinda like jam packed into that word, so I just wanted to
Yeah,
go down there
good.
for a second because it's such an important, it's such an important word for the spiritual life.
Yeah, it's a
Like
good
the mind of the
distinction.
soul, yeah.
Yeah, because it's the eye of the soul in a way, right? And that faculty within us that like sees into the unseen in a way, right? That perceives God and everything in its relationship to God. That was darkened during the fall, and that's where even the approach. So we would say, what is the Orthodox Church? What is its? It is the life of healing, of becoming human. Orthodoxy is the therapeutic method by which people are deified, by which people reach theosis, union with God. And so all of our journey, right, is about that. We're in the divine liturgy, we're receiving uncreated light healing, we're taking Christ's deified body and blood itself into ourself, being united to his deified body organically, right? And then to all those around us who are doing that. When we're in confession, right? We're not like, oh, a father's facing the same direction, and he's applying the medicine of the church for the healing of our soul, right? And there's this beautiful quote, you may have even shared it last week, where St. John Chrysostom says, the church is a hospital and not a courtroom.
Mhm.
And really that's the view, right? And so then that all makes sense when we see what the fall is, and we see that you know in contrast to total depravity, right? We believe that, yes, sin has impacted every part of our being, and yet we're still made in the image of God. Now, we work to restore the likeness, right? Originally, we're in the image and likeness, and we are supposed to participate in divine energy and grow into full stature, right? And then, unfortunately, we took the other path and fell. But now that's what we do here in the life of the church, right?
Oh,
Is
yeah,
to
yeah.
is that journey. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's all over the New Testament where, particularly like in Second Corinthians, Paul is oftentimes talking about us, really kind of like, being filled with God's holiness. We're just like, jars of clay, but within us is the treasure.
Mm-hmm.
And, outwardly we're decaying, but inwardly we're being renewed day by day.
Yeah.
and he'll even say the phrase from like glory to glory,
Glory. Yeah.
you know, and
St. Peter,
so
we're partakers of the divine
yeah.
nature. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, I think in my Protestant days, I would, use the word like sanctification to
Hmm.
talk about like us becoming morally holy. But I think that that word is good because, of course, sanctification is like in the Bible, and we are called to be holy, but we miss the mystical side so much that is in the New Testament and in Paul so much,
Yeah.
where how is this how are we becoming like God, and how are we partaking of the divine nature? Um, that I think is where particularly the Eastern Christian tradition, has really thought about this a lot. Uh, like, what does it mean for the Holy Spirit to be in you? And I
Hmm.
just find like the tradition to be, beautiful, and very helpful in helping me read the New Testament and understand like what the Christian life is supposed to be about.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed. Indeed. I had a thought percolating, and then I heard my little daughter just woke up in the background, but my wife is home and my son's listening to the monitor. So,
Well, we'll get ready to
um,
wrap it up, but I'm really happy that you brought up the word therapeutic because it's the perfect transition to talking about like today you are a therapist. Like
mhm,
that's your job. And I wanted you to be able to address like how you view, the therapeutic nature of orthodoxy and what orthodoxy is with your current profession. Like how do you see them intersecting?
mhm,
We're also in a major kind of mental health crisis in the United States. The church is not unaffected by this. I mean, I
right.
think the church really is wrestling with this. Like American churches are like, how do we deal with mental health
Yeah.
when we've been given them seeker sensitive stuff, which
Right.
which
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
doesn't
you've been
make
eating whipped cream, and here
yeah,
comes winter. Your immune system's shot,
yeah,
right? And you're just getting decimated.
yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
How,
That's
okay.
such a
What
good
do,
point. Yeah, letting the kids
mhm,
eat ice cream and candy all day, and then boom, the immune system is shot. Or you've been pretending like it's summer every day, and then in the pioneer days, and it's like winter comes and you don't have the food you need, and you
mm,
don't have enough uh clothing
firewood
and
and
firewood, and
yeah.
you can't survive the winter. And I think when we see this massive exodus happening in American Christianity, it's related to like our own failure as Christian pastors to
Hmm.
produce like disciples who are ready to pick up their cross and follow him.
Right. Yeah. Because it's largely been divorced from the life of the church.
Mhm.
Right. I mean, yeah, the path that heals. So there's a couple really good books, just for further reference, but one of them is The Science of Spiritual Medicine by Metropolitan Hierotheos Vlachos. He also has a book called Orthodox Psychotherapy. In that, he clarifies what is meant by, he makes this claim that the orthodoxy is a therapeutic science. And he says, and he's using the kind of the word science in the original kind of the original way.
Mhm.
That is a path of healing. And he definitely has a number of critiques toward, you know, what we would call the current modern psychotherapy, right? And in a way, he makes the statement that therapists have replaced priests and deacons in the life of the church, and in many ways, that's true, right? This huge void was created in our culture, um, in the last, I mean, in the last, I'd say, 100 years, right? A
Oh,
huge
yeah,
void,
yeah.
and we
They
see, of
don't
course,
people do not view priests and pastors as doctors of the soul.
right,
Like, yeah, they can help me get out of hell, they can help me connect with people, they can teach my kids morals, but when they think about, can my pastor be a guide for my own, like, spiritual and therapeutic healing?
right,
People get a little
right,
skeptical about that.
yeah. And so he brings back the point of, since orthodoxy is the path toward healing, that when we rightly order through divine energies, our passions, right, the movements of the flesh, and it's interesting because he makes the case like we're like we're not pietistic, we're not moralistic. We don't just focus on outward behaviors and works-based. And we look at what's going on really in the soul, right? And so in my current profession, yeah, I deeply love what I do. And I use a lot of body-based, bottom-up approaches. And
Like
bottom up means
behavioral therapy kind of things.
more of like somatic experiencing, brain spotting, internal family systems. Like these are some of the modalities I use where we get into an experiential, like we're helping the trauma heal from like a body brain based perspective, rather than just, top down, which I'm certified in cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis from like UW. I don't knock that, but it's not one I use. And, it's not just here, let me teach you some skills. Here's how to think more positive. That kind of counseling is out there. And I think it can be helpful to in certain ways, but there's still this huge existential vacuum. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's another strand that I weave in is existential psychotherapy as well. And here's the thing, as a therapist, I enter the subjective world of my client. Like I don't brand myself as a Christian counselor. I do have clients who are Christians and I enter into that world. But if someone's like an atheist, I try to, within that construct, help them become who they are, as Nietzsche, but actually St. Anthony would say, in that way. So yeah, I work at Juniper Mountain Counseling here in Bend, Oregon. I graduated from Adler Graduate School in Minnesota, 2021. And my wife's just getting ready to finish up her master's in marriage family therapy. So yeah, I remember when I, just to kind of put a little bow around this, when I was discerning what I should do, after being a pastor, and I spoke with Father Joseph and I said, hey, I'm thinking of being a therapist. And he said, many, many people, when they come into the church, their garden has so many weeds that even as they're receiving divine grace, it's choking it out, right? There's so many traumas. There's so many that would be a good thing to do, to help people rightly heal their traumas, their soul, so then they can receive the grace of God and like the ground that, put out a full return, like we can be that, right? So I think they definitely overlap. And I also think, like anything, there can be unhealthy, unhelpful forms of therapy, right? Just like anything. But yeah, I don't know where to land that plane.
No, that's good. Like, I think it's so important for people to hear that, God doesn't want us just to be healed on paper, like theoretically, or in a sermon, or by reading a book. Like, oh yeah, God wants me to be healed, and we might read that He wants us to be physically healed, like through a miracle. But when we really look like at our souls and we look at the things that we're going through, it can sometimes feel like you're helpless to make progress in the healing of our souls. I mean, I've
Yeah.
had times in my life where I feel helpless, and it can feel like our faith is disconnected from that. And it's been in my own discovery of reading church history, reading the Desert Fathers in the ancient times, like Saint Gregory the Great, reading them talk about the importance of purification and guarding the heart.
Neptic tradition.
Yeah, like these things that are so practical. Like it's not like this theoretical theology that's up in the clouds that has nothing to do with your life. It is so practical. Like the Desert Fathers are so practical, but yet they are able to reach the deepest parts of your soul. And so that's where I think the Desert Fathers, what you're doing in therapy, in the Orthodox tradition, all of this coming together, I think has a significant role to play in the future of American Christianity. If it's going to be healthy,
Yeah. And that was kind of where my brain was going to go earlier, was that one of the ramifications of forensic justification of the penal substitutionary atonement theory is that, it's just this, now Christ, God looks at you and just sees Christ, that there's this exchange that happens, like you're saved from God in that kind of, system that you would see in a lot of, like, say, Protestant Christianity, where in Orthodoxy we say we're not saved from God, we're saved for God. Right. And so that we're not just believing propositions, which then the belief of that, oh, Jesus died, Jesus, lived sinless life, took my sin, resurrected. I believe that. I ask you to come in. That proposition saves you. We say, no, here's the path to actually experience an ontological change, a change at your being level. So instead of just, having this judicial transformation, you're having an ontological one. You are
right at the deepest level. Yeah.
Deepest level. You're the sword that's put into the hot blazing coals. That now when you take the sword out, it's red, it's hot, has all the energies of the coals, right? It's not the coals. And in the same way, man became a god so that God became a man so that man could become a god. So we dip ourselves in the energies of God, and we're actually changed. We become what God is by nature, by grace. Lowercase g, meaning we enter theosis, right? So yes, and it's wonderful to see, not the same thing, but some movement in the counseling world where it's about coming into that wholeness from a brain body perspective as well, and not just like, let's find your inaccurate beliefs or your cognitive distortions, which could be important, but so
well, that's beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing it. Thanks for spending time with us today. I really appreciate it a lot. It's been great to hear your story. Would you recommend, you've already recommended a couple books, but would you recommend, like, if people, let's say they don't know much about Orthodoxy and they just kind of want like Orthodoxy 101, and they want to go to a few places, what are some, like, maybe books or perhaps like, fathers of the church that you would recommend?
One book, I have it just in the other room. It's from Matthew Galantine, and it's called Searching for God in the Land of Shallow Wells. He was a Protestant pastor for 20 or so years. He's a philosophy professor in Idaho. And this book was written about 20 years ago. Really, really good. Because he's coming especially from a previous Protestant perspective. Does a really good job. Also, this book here, Orthodox Dogmatic Theology. Father Seraphim Rose actually translated it from Russian, if memory serves me.
Okay.
Yeah, and very, very, very good. Very, very practical. Also, this here, the cover is missing, but is the Orthodox Church from Timothy Ware, which is Metropolitan Christos Ware of blessed memory, who just passed this last year. He was an Oxford graduate. You might have his book.
Got the book right here. Yep.
Boom. There you go.
This has been kind of the classic in the English world.
Yeah. And then his follow-up, The Orthodox Way, which is another, lots of early church father quotes in here, looking about the way of the Orthodox life of healing. And then this one for especially the more theologically inclined, Abbot Demington said, this right here contains everything you need. The Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church by Losky.
Yep.
So
I've read that. Yeah. And you're right. That book's not for people that are not reading theology. I mean, you gotta be ready for something like that.
Ready for it. And any therapists who are listening, this is the Dynamis of the Healing, or Dunamis of the Healing, however you want to say that, Patristic Theology and the Psyche. This writer is an Orthodox theologian, huge, we don't really call people theologians per se, and also a Jungian analyst, which is depth psychology. And she does an amazing job of looking at healing from an Orthodox perspective, and getting deep into St. Maximus and so
St. Maximus the Confessor is like one of my favorites.
Yeah. So
Well,
Indeed.
thank you, Jonathan. Thanks for
Indeed.
spending the time that you've sacrificing time, from family, work to be with us today. Looking
Indeed.
forward to continuing following your journey, and I hope to have you on the show a bunch more times
I'd love that.
if by God's grace that happens, and
Yeah.
we can have some deeper dialogues. Maybe we'll have some deeper dialogues. We can talk about the atonement. We could talk about Western and Eastern theology. I mean, we could have
Oh,
a good old
blast.
time. I would love to, but it would be
Incorporate a little whiskey in the mix and make it real
there we
fun.
go.
Yeah.
We better you gotta do that one a little bit later at night with some whiskey
Yeah.
and we'll just like go for it and you can just like I'll just throw up all my thoughts all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that'd be fun, man. That'd be great. And I think you mentioned too, if anyone wants to get a hold of me, they could reach out to you and ask for my information, or like I don't have a website, but I'm on Facebook and
Yeah, someday.
Instagram, and they could just look up Jonathan Seaborn, JONATHON SEABORN, and find me that way. But more than happy
Great.
to answer any questions.
So yeah, questions about orthodoxy, questions about the ancient church, or perhaps therapy and the intersection of
Mhm.
between Christian spirituality and therapy. He's going to be your guy, and just so happy that it worked out for you to be on today.
Indeed.
All
Thank you,
right,
brother.
thanks for joining in. Those who are watching, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like this video, share it so we can get the message out. And have a blessed day. We'll see you later.